This is an elite gala, not a place for you to bring your child and beg for sympathy," Victoria Hale said loudly, making every head turn toward Sarah Mitchell and her 8-year-old son. Only a few steps away stood a man who could have ended the humiliation with one sentence. Alexander Whitmore did not yet know that his silence was about to pull him into a secret buried for years. Less than an hour earlier, the Whitmore estate had been glowing beneath chandeliers. In front of hundreds of guests, a wealthy heiress stepped onto the stage, took Alexander's hand, and confessed her feelings. The 43-year-old billionaire showed no emotion. "I will not marry simply to satisfy other people's expectations." The woman left the stage red-faced. Victoria took the microphone and turned the awkward moment into a joke. Later, when they were alone, she lowered her voice. "You need a marriage that benefits you. I can protect your image and keep the board stable." Alexander adjusted his cufflinks. Marriage is not a business transaction. For people like us, everything is a business transaction. He walked away. The press would probably call him the heartless billionaire again. Outside in the garden, another encounter was waiting. Sarah needed that evening shift to buy Noah's asthma medicine and pay the electric bill. Her babysitter canceled at the last minute, so she received permission for Noah to wait inside the staff greenhouse with sandwiches, books, water, and his inhaler. "You stay here. Do not enter the ballroom, and do not touch anything belonging to the guests." Through the glass, Noah noticed the neglected memorial garden. The soil was cracked, the plants were dying, and moss covered the benches. Carrying a packet of sunflower seeds from Harbor House, he quietly stepped outside. Alexander had just escaped the crowd and was standing alone near the garden. Noah assumed he was simply a guest who did not enjoy talking to people. "If you do not like talking to people, you can start by taking care of a plant." He held out the seeds. Alexander almost called security, but stopped when he noticed the familiar sunflower symbol. "Why do you think I need a plant?" "Because you look at this garden the same way my mom looks at my dad's empty chair," Noah said. "Harbor House always saves seeds for people who need something to look forward to." Alexander accepted the packet. For the first time in years, a child was talking to him without knowing his name or his fortune. While searching for a shovel inside the greenhouse, Noah opened the wrong cabinet and found a dusty blue notebook. Inside was a pressed sunflower, and the initials L.W. Victoria suddenly called for him, so Noah slipped the notebook into his pocket and forgot about it. Victoria found him near the area reserved for important guests, grabbed his shoulder, and called Sarah over. "I had permission for my son to wait in the staff area," Sarah said, pulling Noah close. He was not asking anyone for money or bothering anyone. A responsible mother would not bring her child to work and let him wander around, Victoria replied. "You are removed from this shift. I will also tell the staffing agency not to send you to our events again." Sarah looked at Alexander. He had heard every word, but he remained silent, afraid the press would turn the incident into a scandal. Sarah's expression turned cold. She removed the envelope of tips from her apron and placed it on a table. "I only accept money for work that is treated with respect. Please return this to the guests." Sarah took Noah's hand and left. Alexander tightened his fingers around the seed packet inside his coat, but did not call them back. Outside the gates, Noah asked, "Did you do something wrong?" Sarah pulled his collar higher. "No. Sometimes people look at the work we do and think they know how much we are worth." From behind the glass, Alexander watched mother and son disappear into the rain and felt the cost of his silence. The next morning, Sarah still went to Harbor House. A family who had just lost their home arrived after the meals were gone. Sarah gave them her own meal and Noah's. "We will have soup at home," she said when Noah looked at their empty container. Later, Sarah used plants that were about to be discarded to restore part of the senior courtyard, arranging them according to sunlight and moisture. Margaret Cooper approached with a new notice. "Whitmore Development wants to demolish Harbor House and build a hotel. If the permit is approved, we do not have much time left." At company headquarters, Alexander noticed that the sunflower symbol on Noah's seed packet matched the Harbor House project logo. Richard Hale described the property as inefficient and argued that a new hotel would create jobs. Alexander turned through the file. "Why does the legal package contain only a summary?" "The original documents were already reviewed by legal," Richard replied. "You only need to approve the final step." Richard closed the folder, but Alexander had noticed missing numbers in the section covering the property's land use history. The seed packet beside him reminded him that the summary was not describing an empty piece of land. It was describing real people. When Alexander requested the original property records, several were missing. He delayed the decision for 72 hours and went to Harbor House, introducing himself only as Alex from the review team. Noah recognized him immediately. "Mr. Sunflower," he asked Alexander to fix a loose bench. Alexander held the wrench the wrong way, and Noah showed him how to turn it properly. Sarah remained cautious, but she watched the man in the expensive coat kneel down and tighten each bolt himself. During the $1 community dinner, Alexander sat beside workers, elderly residents, and children. The vocational classroom and food pantry proved that Harbor House was nothing like the abandoned property described in the report. Then he noticed Sarah's drawings for a rainwater collection system, accessible walkways, and a therapeutic garden. "You studied this?" "I had to leave school," Sarah said, rolling up the plans. "I do not need rich people to rescue me. I need powerful people to stop closing doors on poor people." That afternoon, Alexander and Noah planted sunflower seeds in trays of soil. For once, the cold expression on Alexander's face softened. But Victoria had followed him. She arrived with the survey team. "Mr. Whitmore, the board is waiting for your decision." Sarah turned. On the project board was Alexander's photograph beside the title chief executive officer of Whitmore Development. Victoria handed Sarah the demolition notice. "The man your son calls Alex is the man who approved the destruction of this place." Sarah looked at the date. The approval had been recorded before the gala, before Alexander came to Harbor House, acting as though he did not already know what was supposed to happen to it. "I am reconsidering the project," Alexander said. "I came here because I wanted to understand the truth." Sarah pulled Noah closer. "You did not come here to understand us. You came here to decide whether people like us deserve to be erased from the map." Alexander stepped toward her. "The file I received was incomplete. I did not know what this place actually did." "But you signed anyway." He stopped. Sarah looked toward the community dining room, the food pantry, and the senior courtyard. "People like you can make one signature and call it development. People like us have to live with what disappears afterward." Alexander had no answer. Victoria crossed her arms. "This emotional performance changes nothing. The project has already been approved." Alexander looked at her. "No, it changes what I know." Richard called his phone, but Alexander ignored it. Sarah took Noah's hand. I do not need you to feel guilty. I need you to decide whether the truth matters when it costs you something." She turned and walked away with her son. Noah looked back once at the tray of sunflower seeds they had planted together. Alexander remained beside the demolition notice. His own signature sat at the bottom of the page. Only hours earlier, he had been tightening bolts on a bench, eating beside families his own report had reduced to numbers, and helping a child plant seeds in soil marked for demolition. Now every kind act looked different. Had he truly begun to see Harbor House for what it was, or had he simply found a gentler way to live with a decision he had already made? Alexander looked from his signature to the fresh soil in the sunflower tray. For the first time, saving Harbor House would require more than money, sympathy, or a private apology. It would require him to challenge the process that had allowed him to sign away an entire community without ever seeing the people who lived there. And if he could not do that, then every kind gesture he had made since meeting Noah was nothing more than a billionaire trying to make his guilt easier to carry. Sarah had barely led Noah out of the courtyard when Alexander caught up with them. "I am sorry I hid my name from you. I will cover all of Harbor House's operating costs." Sarah stopped, but didn't turn around. "Your money does not change who owns the land, and it does not erase your signature from the demolition order. I need a written decision, a transparent legal process, and no public relations campaign interfering with it. I will suspend the project for 30 days. You stopped only after you were exposed. Do not confuse a late decision to do the right thing with restored trust." That afternoon, Alexander signed the suspension order. Richard warned about contract losses, while Victoria accused the chief executive officer of letting emotion control him. 2 days later, the press described Harbor House as a failing facility being exploited by a banquet worker. Donors delayed contributions. The staffing agency placed Sarah on a do-not-hire list for causing trouble at an event. The injustice was no longer just one humiliating sentence. It was taking away Sarah's income and threatening the survival of the entire center. During a garden cleanup, a survey crew sent by Richard began drilling without permission, even though the project had been suspended. Cement dust covered the walkway. Noah started coughing, then doubled over, struggling to breathe. "His inhaler!" Sarah shouted. Alexander froze for a moment as memories of Lydia and Rebecca after the accident rushed back. But this time, he did not run. He shut down the drilling equipment, carried Noah away from the dust, and followed Sarah's instructions. 2 doses from the inhaler slowly brought the boy's breathing under control. Noah looked at Alexander's trembling hands. "You were scared, but you stayed." Alexander lowered his head. Courage was not the absence of fear that he might lose someone again. It was staying when someone needed him. That evening, Noah searched through his cloth bag and pulled out the blue notebook he had found at the estate. Sarah knew it did not belong to Harbor House, so she brought it to Margaret Cooper. The moment Margaret saw the pressed sunflower and the initials LW, she went silent. This belonged to Lydia Whitmore. She used it when she designed the first garden. Inside the notebook was a letter saying Harbor House was meant to remain protected for the community, along with a drawing of a key and the code H17. Eleanor Whitmore was called in. She ran her fingers over her daughter's handwriting, then looked at Alexander. "You signed an order to destroy the place Lydia built without ever asking what your sister wanted." Alexander did not defend himself. Noah pointed at the drawing. "That looks like the symbol on the old cabinets in the records room," Cabinet H-17 was opened in front of Thomas Reed. Inside were trust documents, a property map, and the registration number for an amendment to the community fund. Thomas warned that the old copies alone might not permanently stop the development, but the registration number could lead them to a certified version in the county archives. At the same time, Richard learned that the search was getting dangerously close to the truth. He ordered internal scans connected to the amendment deleted. But Thomas had already requested a server backup before the deletion was completed. Another warning sign appeared when Alexander reviewed people affected by older Whitmore projects. The name Daniel Mitchell appeared in the file of a scaffolding collapse 6 years earlier. The internal report claimed Daniel had changed equipment without authorization, causing the accident that killed him. Alexander brought the file to Sarah. She read several lines, then threw it onto the table. That conclusion destroyed my husband's name for 6 years. They sent compensation 3 days after his funeral and made me sign a confidentiality agreement when I could barely sleep. I did not know Daniel worked for Whitmore Development. But your name was on the company that called him responsible for his own death. Sarah took out an old phone and played Daniel's final voice message. His broken words came through the sound of machinery. Hale received the report. If they keep working tomorrow, someone will die. Alexander listened twice. The project file contained an unexplained 18-hour gap before the collapse. The name of structural engineer Samuel Grant had also been removed from the personnel list. Both clues led back to Richard. Alexander ordered Thomas to preserve all related data and begin an independent audit. Richard spoke like a father advising a son. A new settlement would cause less damage than digging up the past. If the past can destroy this company, the problem is not the person digging it up. It was the first time Alexander had openly opposed the man who had guided his career. Richard then turned to Sarah. In a private room at Harbor House, he offered to pay her tuition, buy her an apartment, and create a trust fund for Noah. In return, she had to sign a statement blaming Daniel for the scaffolding collapse and promise not to release his final voice message. Sarah secretly activated the recorder in her coat. If my husband was responsible, you would not need to buy my silence a second time. Richard left calmly, unaware that the building's security system had recorded the meeting too. Victoria obtained the audio. She removed the part where her father offered money and kept only references to the apartment, tuition, and compensation. The edited recording was sent to the press with a headline accusing Sarah of trying to extort Alexander. By the next morning, television trucks surrounded Harbor House. Some parents began questioning whether Sarah had approached Alexander for money. Victoria urged him to deny any connection to Sarah to protect the company's stock price. Alexander refused. Stop the media campaign. Sarah has never asked me for $1. He also removed himself from authority over the investigation so the review could remain independent. Sarah was not impressed. Your statement is not enough. We need evidence. That afternoon, a silver-haired man appeared at the back entrance of Harbor House. He introduced himself as Samuel Grant, a former structural engineer for Whitmore Development. I stayed silent because Richard threatened my job and pension. But Daniel died, and I have lived with that for 6 years. Samuel opened his briefcase and produced a signed report. It stated that the scaffolding connectors failed safety standards and ordered construction to stop immediately. The report had been submitted 18 hours before the collapse. Richard Hale's initials appeared under the section confirming receipt. Attached was an email ordering the site to remain open so the project would not fall behind schedule. Samuel placed the report before Sarah. Daniel did not cause the collapse. He died trying to stop it. Sarah stared at Richard's initials beneath the warning. Immediate risk of collapse. For 6 years, Daniel had been blamed for an accident he had tried to prevent. Sarah had been forced to live with a settlement signed while she was grieving, and a confidentiality agreement that protected the people responsible. Now the same man connected to that cover-up had tried to destroy Harbor House, damage her reputation, and buy her silence again. Alexander looked at the evidence. The missing 18 hours were no longer a mystery. Someone had removed them. Samuel's name had not disappeared from the personnel list by accident either. His report proved the company had been warned. Sarah looked at him. Did Daniel know they would ignore the report? Samuel nodded. He confronted Richard. Daniel said that if construction continued, he would take the warning outside the company. The next morning, the crew was ordered back onto the scaffolding. Sarah closed her eyes. Noah stood beside her, young enough to miss the legal details but old enough to understand his father's name. My dad tried to save people? Sarah put an arm around him. Yes, he did. Alexander looked at Noah. He could not undo Daniel's death or erase 6 years of grief. He could not restore trust with money or an apology, but he could stop the truth from being buried again. Thomas, preserve the originals, make certified copies, and send everything directly to the independent investigators. Nobody inside Whitmore Development controls these documents anymore. Thomas nodded. Sarah looked back at the report and traced Daniel's warning until her finger stopped at Richard's initials. If Richard Hale had hidden the truth about a man's death for 6 years, destroyed records, tried to buy Sarah's silence, and turned the press against her, one question remained. What would he do to stop the truth from becoming public the next morning? The next morning, Samuel's report was presented at an emergency hearing on Harbor House. The room was packed with residents, reporters, investors, and members of the Whitmore board. Sarah was represented by an attorney from a workers' rights organization. Alexander had already turned over the company data to independent investigators and removed himself from any related vote. Richard argued that Lydia's letter was only a personal wish, that Samuel's report might have been created after the accident, and that Sarah had accepted compensation and signed a settlement 6 years earlier. Victoria played the edited recording. Sarah's voice could be heard mentioning an apartment, tuition, and compensation. Murmurs spread through the room. Several board members called for the hearing to end. Sarah stood and placed 3 objects on the table: Noah's inhaler, Daniel's work badge, and the Harbor House demolition notice. I'm not here to become rich or take control of this company. These represent a child, a worker, and a community that can all be erased by people with power. I am asking you to restore Daniel's name, protect Harbor House, investigate the safety violations, and protect whistleblowers. Eleanor confirmed that the notebook and handwriting belonged to Lydia. Margaret Cooper described the day Harbor House was founded. Thomas Reed then presented a certified copy of the missing amendment recovered from county property records. The document stated that the land could only be used for community purposes. If anyone attempted to develop it commercially, ownership would automatically transfer to the Harbor House Community Trust. That meant the hotel project was not legally valid. Access logs showed that Victoria had opened the amendment 6 months earlier and removed it from the file later presented to Alexander. Victoria went pale. I was only following legal instructions, Thomas answered. The legal department never instructed anyone to remove this document. Samuel admitted that he had stayed silent because he feared losing his job and pension. Then he placed the original safety report before the board. The inspection company's server confirmed that the report had been submitted 18 hours before the scaffolding collapse. It warned that the connectors did not meet safety standards and ordered construction to stop immediately. An email from Richard read, "Continue work. Every day of delay will cost hundreds of thousands of dollars." Purchasing records showed that Richard had approved cheaper connectors, even after the warning. Daniel's final voice message matched the timeline. Hale received the report. If they keep working tomorrow, someone will die. No one could call Daniel responsible for the accident anymore. He had died because the site remained open after his warning. Richard clenched his hands. One email does not prove that I knew the scaffolding would collapse. Sarah's attorney replied, "It proves that you knew there was a serious risk and chose the schedule anyway." A technical expert then presented the metadata and played the complete recording of Richard's meeting with Sarah. Richard was the one who offered the apartment, tuition, and a trust fund for Noah. Sarah had only repeated those terms while rejecting them. Internal emails also proved that Victoria had distributed the edited audio after Alexander ordered the media campaign stopped. Alexander stood. He did not claim that Richard had simply deceived him. I signed a project without reading the original records. I stayed silent when Sarah was humiliated. I allowed personal trust to replace my responsibility as a leader. He looked towards Sarah, Noah, Daniel's family, and the Harbor House residents. I apologized to Sarah, Noah, Daniel's family, the workers, and this community. I am also asking the board to investigate my own responsibility. Alexander placed the packet of sunflower seeds Noah had once given him beside Daniel's report. A child taught me to care for something that was still alive. Daniel Mitchell died trying to protect other people's lives. The company carrying my family's name will not continue growing by burying either of those truths. The board removed Richard from his position and referred the evidence to investigators for possible fraud, concealment of evidence, safety violations, and falsification of accident records. Victoria was fired for hiding the amendment and manipulating evidence. Old contracts and accidents approved under Richard's leadership were ordered into audit. For the first time, the people who had controlled the story were no longer controlling the evidence. The hotel project was canceled. Under Lydia's amendment, Harbor House was transferred fully to the Community Trust. Whitmore Development publicly withdrew its accusation against Daniel and created a compensation fund managed by an independent organization. Samuel received whistleblower protection. Alexander offered to pay for Sarah to finish her landscape architecture program. She refused a private favor. Open that opportunity to other single parents and let an independent panel choose. The Daniel Mitchell Education Fund was created. Sarah's application was anonymized and reviewed beside every other candidate. She was selected because of her garden restoration plan and practical experience, not because she knew the chief executive officer. She returned to school through a process she could trust. Margaret continued managing Harbor House. Samuel began teaching safety practices to young engineers. Thomas helped oversee the company reforms. Alexander gave up his annual bonus. Whitmore Development created an independent safety board, gave whistleblowers a direct reporting channel to outside auditors, and required public consultation before any project involving community land. Older accidents were reopened for review. Alexander remained chief executive officer only after an independent evaluation and under new oversight. 6 months later, Sarah's design had transformed the Harbor House garden. Sunflowers surrounded Lydia's memorial. Another section carried Daniel's name and the names of other workers. Children had their own planting beds. Elderly residents had accessible paths and resting benches. 3 gardeners were hired from families who had once depended on Harbor House. Eleanor returned to the Whitmore estate for the first time in years. She and Alexander planted a row of sunflowers in the old memorial garden. Alexander began reopening rooms that had remained locked since the deaths of Lydia and Rebecca. More importantly, he learned to say their names without walking away from the conversation. Only after Harbor House fully belonged to the community and Sarah's education selection process was complete did Alexander ask her to have coffee with him. "The first time I met you, I thought I had the right to decide what places deserved to be saved," he said. "Now I only want to ask whether you would give me a chance to know you, not as the chief executive officer." Sarah did not pretend that every wound had disappeared. 1 coffee, no assistants, no luxury car, and no press. Alexander smiled. Agreed. Noah did not try to push them together. He simply placed a fresh packet of sunflower seeds on the table and ran back toward the garden. When the first flowers began moving in the sunlight, Noah dragged 1 more chair beside Sarah and Alexander. Not because he was trying to create a perfect family, but because in a place rebuilt around hope, there should always be room for someone still learning how to return. The consequences for Richard and Victoria did not come from Sarah demanding revenge. They came from documents, recordings, server logs, financial records, and the choices they had made themselves. Richard faced investigation for hiding safety warnings, manipulating accident records, and concealing evidence. Victoria lost her position and influence because she had hidden the land amendment and deliberately altered evidence to destroy another person's reputation. Daniel's name was restored publicly. Harbor House could no longer be sold or demolished for commercial development, and Sarah did not become successful because a billionaire rescued her. She succeeded because once the process became fair, her work was strong enough to stand on its own. Alexander's change did not erase his earlier failures either. He had signed without reading. He had stayed silent when speaking would have mattered. He had trusted powerful people more than the communities affected by his decisions. A second chance did not remove those facts. It required him to live differently after accepting them. The sunflower seeds Noah had given him became a reminder of that lesson. Seeds cannot grow simply because someone holds them. They need soil, water, time, and care. People are not so different. A second chance only begins when someone accepts responsibility, repairs what can still be repaired, and refuses to leave other people alone with the consequences of what went wrong.